Okay, let's unpack this. You know, usually when we talk about, like, a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of precision.
Right, yeah.
It feels like engineering, right? You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the illuminated screen and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's binary. It's either broken or it's not broken.
Exactly. It's clean. And I mean, there's a comfort in that cleanliness. We are wired to like things that are visible, things that can be neatly categorized and immediately addressed.
Definitely.
But then you step into the world of human organization or, the psychology of leadership, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely broken. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just entirely murky.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Because when a group of human beings fails to achieve a goal, you can't exactly just put the organization through an MRI machine.
Right. And that exact feeling, that shift from a clean binary reality into complete and utter murkiness is the starting point for our conversation today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
I'm really looking forward to this one.
I'm thrilled you were here with us listening to this because today we are looking at the invisible thread that holds every single group together, the chain of command. We have a fascinating stack of sources today: historical notes, strategic excerpts, military history.
Yeah, and the mission here is to figure out why some leaders can control millions of people with like an absolute whisper, while other leaders can't even get a team of 10 to walk across a completely undefended beach.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. The sources we're working from today all center on this profound tension. How do you lead a group, a project, or an organization effectively?
Yeah.
If you grip the wheel too tightly, if you dictate every single micro movement, people naturally resent you. They begin to rebel. Or, maybe worse, they surrender their autonomy entirely and become these mindless automatons.
Right. They stop thinking for themselves, which means the second a problem arises that isn't in the employee handbook, the whole system just freezes.
Precisely. But then you have the other extreme, which is equally lethal. If you are too easygoing, people revert to selfishness and chaos reigns.
So the goal today is to discover how to create a chain of command where people willingly follow your lead without feeling suffocated, avoiding the lethal trap of groupthink.
Exactly. It's a tightrope walk.
And to understand the mechanics of this, we're going to look at one of the biggest disasters of World War I. Then, a masterclass in bureaucratic maneuvering from World War II. And finally, a really brilliant counterintuitive analogy about a horse.
Yeah, the horse analogy is fantastic.
I love it, but I think we have to start with the failure, because to understand how to build a perfect chain of command, we first need to look at what happens when one completely spectacularly shatters.
And for that, we have to travel back to the year 1914, World War I. Let's really set the stage here, because the pressure of this moment dictates everything.
Right, context is everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By the end of 1914, the initial rapid movements of the armies have ground to an absolute horrific halt. The British and French are locked in a deadly stalemate with the Germans all along the Western Front.
I mean, we're talking about hundreds of miles of trenches, freezing mud, zero strategic movement, just an unfathomable scale of human casualties.
Right. It was pure desperation. Winston Churchill and the British military leaders hatch a bold plan. They want to attack Gallipoli, take the Dardanelles straight, capture Constantinople, and basically knock Turkey out of the war.
Which, if it works, completely changes the trajectory of the entire war.
Absolutely. So they select General Sir Ian Hamilton to command this expeditionary force. He's 62, considered a highly capable strategist.
And the directive they give Hamilton is almost jarring in its simplicity, right? Churchill essentially points at the map and says, take Constantinople.
That's essentially it. He just hands them the keys to the army. So the initial landings start on April 27th, 1915, and this is where the grand strategy on paper violently collides with reality.
Everything goes wrong.
Almost every variable. Bad maps, narrow beaches, and the Turks fight back with the fierce resistance the British simply hadn't anticipated.
So instead of a triumphant sweep, they hit a brick wall, a stalemate. 70,000 men pinned down on these narrow beaches.
Yeah, heavily fortified brick wall.
Oh.
So as summer drags on into June, Churchill sends reinforcements. A new pivot plan is devised. Hamilton plans to land 20,000 fresh men at Suvla Bay.
Which is like a vulnerable, completely undefended target.
Yes, it's the key to breaking the stalemate. But to execute this, Hamilton is forced to accept some really suboptimal subordinates. Lieutenant General Sir Frederick Stopford and Major General Frederick Hammersley.
let's talk about these two because this is where it gets kind of unbelievable. Stopford is 61, never actually led troops in combat, and his health is poor.
He's rigid and terrified of taking risks.
And Hammersley, the guy who is actually going to be on the sand with the troops, is literally recovering from a severe nervous breakdown.
Right. He was emotionally and psychologically fragile. So Hamilton is relying on these flawed links in his chain of command. And this brings us to the fatal crux of the failure.
Hamilton's leadership style.
Exactly. The sources describe Hamilton's command style as exceptionally gentlemanly and polite. He wanted his troops, the moment they landed at Suvla Bay, to advance immediately and secure these crucial hills called Tekke Tepe.
Because if they get their artillery up there, they dominate the whole peninsula.
Right. It's a race against time before the Turks send reinforcements. But Hamilton, trapped by his own polite nature, doesn't want to overly pressure or offend the nervous Stopford.
So his order is incredibly vague.
Yes. Instead of saying advance as soon as possible, he tells them to advance if possible.
Wait, if possible.
If possible.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I was thinking about this. Hamilton's order was basically the 1915 equivalent of a passive-aggressive corporate email.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You know the ones, like, hey, if you have a chance this week, maybe look at this report. And what happens? No one does the work. Because the leader refused to make it an explicit priority.
Exactly. Vagueness at the top always turns into lethargy at the bottom. Stopford absorbs this, if possible, mentality. Since he's terrified of risk, it gives him permission to do nothing.
And he passes that lack of urgency down to Hammersley, who passes it down to his colonels.
Right. So let's look at the disastrous result. August 7th, the troops land, and what does Stopford do?
He stays offshore on a boat?
Yes. On a Navy sloop. He stays out there all day. And Hammersley, the guy on the beach, has no answers for his confused troops because he's waiting for orders from Stopford.
And meanwhile, Hammersley is just lounging on the beach, building a headquarters for himself. 20,000 men in the middle of a brutal war just chilling on the beach like it's a bank holiday.
It's absurd. So the troops do absolutely nothing. By the time Hamilton personally intervenes the next day, it's far too late. The Turkish reinforcements take the hills 30 minutes before the British arrive.
Wow. 30 minutes.
30 minutes dictated the fate of the whole campaign. The Allies were forced to evacuate, an utter defeat.
And the takeaway here is just so clear. The failure wasn't the technology or the troops, it was the chain of command.
Hamilton's vagueness. The expert text quotes the ancient Greek historian Xenophon here, which is perfect. He wrote, "For what the leaders are, that, as a rule, will the men below them be."
That is powerful. But it makes me wonder, if Hamilton failed because he was too loose, too polite, is the answer to just become a micromanaging dictator?
Well, that's the natural reactionary instinct.
Yeah, to just grip the wheel as hard as you can.
But the sources argue that authoritarian micromanagement is equally disastrous. And to explain why, they introduce this profound visual concept, the reins.
I found this part so fascinating.
So imagine a horse. A horse with no bridle, no reins at all, is completely useless to a rider. You have zero input. It just wanders off.
Yeah.
That is essentially Ian Hamilton at Gallipoli.
Right. Total slack equals a total loss of direction.
Exactly. But the opposite extreme is just as bad. Imagine a rider who is constantly aggressively yanking on the reins at every single turn. It's a vain effort at control. It frustrates the horse and exhausts the rider.
Because you're fighting the creature instead of guiding it.
Yes. So the sweet spot, the true definition of control, according to the text, comes from almost letting go. You hold the reins so lightly that the horse feels no tug, but it senses the absolute slightest change in tension and responds exactly as you desire.
Almost telepathic.
Connecting this to leadership, there's a quote from Colonel John W. Thomason, Jr. He wrote, "Any army is like a horse in that it reflects the temper and the spirit of its rider."
Meaning uneasiness in the leader transmits straight through the reins.
Precisely. The team feels that underlying anxiety or tension, and they become uncertain themselves.
Now, I have to push back a little here. This sounds beautiful in theory, right? A lovely metaphor. But how do you actually do this? How do you hold the reins lightly when the stakes are incredibly high without just losing control of the team entirely?
It feels like a paradox, absolutely. But it's a learnable skill. And the sources pivot here to a man who basically mastered this exact art. We're moving from the beaches of Gallipoli to the bureaucratic nightmare of the 1939 U.S. War Department.
Yes, Brigadier General George C. Marshall.
FDR appoints Marshall as the new Army Chief of Staff to prepare the country for the looming World War. And what's fascinating here is the state of the War Department at that time. It was a hopelessly dysfunctional mess.
Just a swamp of monstrous egos.
Massive egos, senior officers protecting their little fiefdoms, deliberate communication breakdowns. It was perfectly designed to resist any forward momentum.
And the temptation for Marshall must have been to act like a dictator, to go in, scream at people, and micromanage every department.
Oh, definitely. But the text notes this would have been a trap. It would have exhausted him, probably caused a heart attack, made him look like a bully, and he would have completely lost sight of the big picture.
Right, preparing for a global war. So how did he solve this?
He used what the sources call a remote control strategy. Years earlier, at Fort Benning, Marshall had kept a private notebook. He quietly recorded the names of promising, young, ambitious officers he had personally trained.
Guys like Dwight D. Eisenhower, Omar Bradley, Mark Clark.
Exactly. Men who didn't have massive egos yet, but who shared his rigorous way of thinking. So he quietly retires the stubborn old guard and replaces them with his protégés from the notebook.
So he's basically replacing the old egos with people who already know his operating system.
Yes. The text details how Marshall actually tested Eisenhower's patience. He kept him stationed in Washington, D.C., meeting with him constantly. He was letting Eisenhower soak up the Marshall style. He was effectively cloning his own leadership brain.
And then, when he puts Eisenhower in charge in Europe, he tells him to take Bradley as his deputy.
Right, because Bradley thought just like Marshall and Eisenhower. So Marshall's highly efficient staff structure in Washington was perfectly cloned overseas.
He didn't even have to be there.
Exactly. He could completely let go of the European reins.
And meanwhile, back in Washington, he's enforcing strict brevity, cutting direct deputies from 60 to 6, ignoring anyone who wandered off topic.
Without raising his voice, his quiet, demanding tension was felt everywhere.
Which leads to my favorite story from the sources, the $3.52 check anecdote.
Oh, it's such a brilliant psychological anchor.
So picture this. General Leslie R. Groves, the director of the Manhattan Project, comes to Marshall for his signature on a $100 million authorization. $100 million.
A staggering amount of money back then.
Right. And Marshall signs it in total silence. He hands it back to Groves. And as Groves is walking out, Marshall stops him and says, "It may interest you to know what I was doing just now. I was writing a check for $3.52 for grass seed."
It's just so calculated.
So what does this all mean? To me, Marshall was like an architect building a self-correcting machine. Subordinates like Groves realized that if Marshall cared about a $3 discrepancy, he saw absolutely everything.
He planted a seed of omnipresent accountability. He completely transformed the culture through remote control.
He held the reins so lightly, but everyone felt his presence. But Marshall succeeded because he maintained ultimate authority while delegating the execution.
Yes, unity of command.
And that stands out to me because today we are often taught the exact opposite. We're told leadership should be highly democratic, flat, and consensus-driven.
That is the dominant modern paradigm. But the text breaks down a very stark warning against this. It warns against yielding to modern political pressures to constantly poll the staff and share decision-making.
There's a great quote in the sources from Friedrich Nietzsche on this. "Madness is the exception in individuals, but the rule in groups."
Rule in groups. Think about why groups fail at strategy. The text argues that people in groups become political animals.
Right, because if you're alone, you can be bold. But in a committee, you start worrying about your image.
Exactly. You say things to please others, to aim for social harmony, to avoid risk. Nobody wants to be the one to pitch the wild idea that fails. So everyone retreats to the safest middle ground.
And compromise actively kills creativity. To prove this, the sources give us this rapid-fire list of historical disasters of divided command.
Let's look at the Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. The Romans outnumber Hannibal's forces almost 2-1. But they had 2 Roman consuls sharing command, alternating days.
Which is just an insane way to run an army. They fought each other as much as the enemy.
And because Hannibal had a singular, undisputed mind, he executed a perfect double envelopment and annihilated them.
Wow. And then you skip forward to the 7 Years' War. Frederick the Great defeats a massive 5-power alliance. Why? Because he could decide instantly as one man, while his enemies had to constantly consult their allied committees.
And in the Vietnam War, von Guyenjap's unity of command gave him a massive advantage over the U.S. strategy, which was crafted by a crowd of politicians and generals.
It's a recurring theme. The text brings in Baron Antoine-Henri de Jomini, a theorist who served under Napoleon. He poses this really funny thought experiment.
Yeah, Jomini asks us to imagine if Napoleon had proposed his brilliant, daring moves, like crossing the St. Bernard Pass, to a democratic council of war.
The timid ones would have called it madness, the logistics guys would have panicked, the group would have absolutely rejected it.
A brilliant strategy executed by a committee of skeptics is doomed.
Okay, let's unpack this rule then, because the sources aren't saying you shouldn't listen to people.
No, not at all. You can ask for advice, you can poll your staff for data, you could even make cosmetic changes to soothe egos.
But you must never relinquish your unity of command. Like Napoleon said, better one bad general than two good ones.
It's provocative, but true. One mediocre mind moving with singular purpose will almost always defeat two brilliant minds bogged down in compromise.
Right. So if you hold the overarching strategic vision alone, you absolutely need a team capable of executing it. Which leads us to the next challenge. How do you find them? And how do you monitor them without micromanaging?
Well, the sources explain that a glittering resume isn't enough. Expertise is seductive, but you primarily need to hire for character.
You need people who make up for your deficiencies but lack oversized egos.
Exactly. The text uses Abraham Lincoln as an example. He had the grand strategy for the Civil War, but no military background. His early generals, the West Point guys with the great resumes, had massive egos and refused to listen to him.
They just wouldn't execute his vision.
Right, until he found Ulysses S. Grant. Grant wasn't politically polished, but he shared Lincoln's aggressive vision and didn't have a fragile ego.
And I love that the sources pivot here to a totally different world. Ingmar Bergman, the filmmaker.
A brilliant pivot. Early on, Bergman used to scream at his cast out of frustration. He had a pristine vision, and the pressure made him lash out.
And what happens when you scream at creative people? You create resentful rebels or obedient automatons. You don't get great art.
But then he handpicked a trusted crew, people like Max von Sydow. Once he had this trusted repertory company whose standards matched his own, he could just suggest an idea and sit back and watch them work.
He loosened the reins.
Exactly. But the sources issue a major warning here. As you assemble this team, you have to watch out for political animals.
Moles who infiltrate to build their own factions.
Yes. And the key sign, people who perfectly mirror your ideas to charm you. When someone agrees with you too quickly, without any friction, you should be wary.
But as a leader, you want people to agree with you. It feels validating. So how do you defend against that?
The text details Queen Elizabeth I's brilliant defense strategy. She kept her opinions strictly quiet.
Oh, that's so smart. Because if the sycophants don't know what you think, they don't know what to mirror.
Exactly. In the silence, they are forced to speak first and reveal their actual agendas.
Okay, so you have your team. You've weeded out the sycophants. But how do you know what's really happening? Information gets heavily filtered and sugar-coated as it moves up the formal chain of command.
Human nature ensures that it gets sanitized. The middle manager doesn't want to look bad. So the text introduces Martin van Trevelt's concept of the directed telescope.
The shadow network.
Right. Napoleon used this extensively. He had a network of loyal, young officers sent to far-off fronts to bypass the formal chain entirely.
They just brought back instant, unfiltered information straight to his tent.
They bypassed the generals who might hide their failures.
Now, in a modern context, that sounds kind of like spying on your employees, which could destroy trust.
It can, if done poorly. But the modern equivalent isn't about incrimination, it's about data validation. It's like a CEO going undercover boss or bypassing the sanitized quarterly reports to occasionally redirect customer support logs.
Or casually talking to frontline engineers to find the ground truth. That makes a lot of sense.
It prevents leaders from living in a spreadsheet fantasy land.
Okay, so you have your unity of command, your trusted team, and your unfiltered information from the telescope. The final step connecting all of this is the communication itself, the orders.
And this brings us back to the Goldilocks problem we saw at the start.
Right. Hamilton's orders were too vague. Advance if possible, but if they're too specific, people stop thinking. Erring in neither direction is truly an art form.
And Napoleon provides the blueprint for this. His orders were legendary. The text says they were packed with juicy details.
He showed them how his mind worked, but allowed interpretive leeway.
Exactly. There's a specific quote in the sources where Napoleon is writing to a field general. He gives him highly specific geographic boundaries. Travel to Worms, Castle, Colne.
Right.
But then he asks highly specific analytical questions to focus the general's mind. He says, can the fortress of Hanau be secured by a coup de main?
Let's define that really quick. A coup de main.
It's a swift, sudden surprise attack to capture a position in one blow. So he's not just saying, go look at the fortress. He's asking, evaluate if we can storm the gates and take it in 5 minutes.
But he doesn't tell the general how to do the evaluation. He leaves the tactical execution to the man on the ground.
Precisely. And he ends the letter by saying, you can see for yourself how important it is for the beginning of the campaign. He explicitly gives the general the why.
That is so vital. It's clear, concise, and inspiring. Instead of feeling like a bureaucratic minion executing a bland task, the recipient feels like a vital participant in a grand cause. It fills them with a fighting spirit.
It's a masterful balance of control and autonomy.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. If we synthesize all this for the listener, what's the ultimate takeaway?
The overarching lesson is that leading effectively isn't about choosing between being a tyrant or a pushover. It's about deliberately designing a brilliant chain of command.
Right. Avoiding Hamilton's vague politeness, employing Marshall's remote control,
Guarding your unity of command against the madness of groupthink.
using a directed telescope to find the truth.
And ultimately, holding the reins with that perfect light tension. Firm enough that people know the direction, but light enough that they feel free to run.
Absolutely. And this matters directly to you listening right now. Whether you are running a massive company, leading a small creative team, or just organizing a community project, the structure of how you communicate your vision will dictate your success.
Everything starts from the top.
It really does. Which brings me to a final, slightly provocative thought I want to leave you with today. It builds on the source's warning about political animals, the ones who perfectly mirror your ideas to charm you.
The moles.
Yes. Look around your team right now. What if the most agreeable person in your circle, the one who never pushes back, is actually the one quietly fracturing your unity behind the scenes?
That is a chilling thought.
How do you test their true motives tomorrow without destroying the very team spirit you're trying to build? How do you pierce that muddy water and see the true X-ray of your organization? Something to definitely mull over on your own.
It's the ultimate test of leadership.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.